The Varathi Imperium stretched across 12 star systems and contained more worlds than most species could count in a lifetime. And at the center of this vast empire sat Queen Saratha on a throne made from the bones of a dead star she had ruled for over 800 years, which was not unusual for her kind. And in that time she had seen empires rise and fall like waves against the shore. But there was one thing that had haunted her for the last 3 centuries. One puzzle that refused to be solved. One mystery that made her feel like a child trying to understand the ocean. The weapon sat in the relic vault on Station Omega-7, a diplomatic outpost on the edge of human space. And it had been there for exactly 312 years, ever since her scouts had pulled it from the ruins of a dead world that had once belonged to the Precursors. Nobody knew who the Precursors were, or where they had gone, but they had left behind wonders that made the greatest achievements of modern civilizations look like toys made by children. And this weapon was the greatest wonder of all. Her scientists called it the Silence, according to the ancient text they had found alongside it. The Silence had ended wars between beings so powerful they could move stars with their thoughts, and whoever controlled it could bring peace to any battlefield simply by activating it. And Queen Saratha wanted that power more than she had ever wanted anything in her long and complicated life. She had assembled 47 different research teams over the centuries, and each team had contained the brightest minds her empire could produce. Beings with dozens of advanced degrees who had spent their entire lives studying exotic physics and precursor technology. And every single one of them had failed. They had mapped the crystalline structure of the device down to the atomic level, and they had analyzed its quantum signatures. And they had written millions of pages of theoretical frameworks. But the Silence remained silent, dark and cold and completely unresponsive to anything they tried. The Queen had spent 900 billion credits on this project. Enough money to build a fleet of warships or feed a dozen planets for a century. And she had nothing to show for it except frustration and a growing sense that the universe was laughing at Huron, the same station where the Silence sat in its vault, surrounded by security systems and research equipment worth more than most planetary economies. There worked a human named Marcus Webb. Marcus was 43 years old, and he came from a place called Ohio on the human homeworld of Earth. And he had taken a job as a janitor on Station Omega-7 because it paid well, and he needed the money. His wife Elena had died 2 years ago from a disease that human medicine could treat but not cure, without expensive procedures that their insurance refused to cover. And Marcus had borrowed money to pay for her treatment. And even though she had died anyway, the debt remained, growing larger every month like a tumor made of numbers. So Marcus mopped floors and emptied waste receptacles and cleaned the windows that looked out into the endless black of space. And he did his job well because that was the kind of man he was. The kind who took pride in his work even when nobody noticed or cared. And nobody noticed Marcus Webb at all. The Varathi researchers walked past him every day without seeing him, their minds full of quantum mechanics and dimensional theory. And the security guards looked through him like he was made of glass. And the other station workers ignored him, because janitors existed at the bottom of every social ladder in every civilization that had ever existed. Marcus did not mind being invisible because he had never been the kind of person who needed attention, and besides, being invisible meant he could observe things without anyone realizing he was watching. Watch the Varathi researchers argue about theories he could not understand, using words that sounded like music played backwards. And he watched them run experiments that made the air taste like copper and the lights flicker in strange patterns. And he watched them fail over and over again while their frustration grew like a storm building on the horizon one night. Very late, when most of the station was asleep and the corridors were empty, except for the soft hum of life support systems, Marcus was cleaning near the relic vault when he noticed something unusual. The Researchers had left a holographic display running, which was against regulations but happened all the time because brilliant people often forgot practical things like turning off equipment. And the display showed a slowly rotating image of the silenced Marcus, leaned on his mop and looked at the weapon for the first time. Really looked at it, and something about it bothered him in a way he could not quite explain. He had spent his whole life fixing things, ever since he was a boy taking apart broken radios in his grandfather's garage. And he had developed an instinct for seeing what was wrong with machines. A feeling in his gut that told him when something was not quite right. The silence was beautiful in a strange and alien way. All curves and crystals and surfaces that seemed to shift when you were not looking directly at them. But there was something off about it. Something that made Marcus's handyman instincts twitch like a cat seeing movement in the corner of its eye. He could not say what it was, not yet. But the question stayed with him as he finished his shift and went back to his small quarters and lay in his narrow bed staring at the ceiling. What was wrong with that weapon? And why had nobody else seen it? Marcus did not know that this question would change his life and the fate of an entire empire. Did not know that his invisible existence was about to become very visible indeed. Did not know that sometimes the biggest problems have the smallest solutions. He just knew that something was wrong with the silence. And that bothered him the way a crooked picture on a wall bothered him, the way a squeaky door bothered him. The way anything broken had always bothered him since he was old enough to hold a screwdriver. Marcus Webb was a fixer. And somewhere in that alien weapon was something that needed to be fixed. He fell asleep thinking about crystals and curves and the frustrated faces of researchers who had spent their whole lives failing to solve a puzzle that an entire empire desperately wanted solved. Outside his window, the stars burned cold and bright against the darkness, indifferent to the small human and his small thoughts, not knowing that sometimes the smallest thoughts lead to the biggest changes. And in the relic vault, the silence waited, dark and patient, holding its secrets close like a miser holding gold. Marcus could not stop thinking about the silence. Every night when he cleaned near the relic vault, he found himself pausing to look through the reinforced windows at the weapon that had defeated the greatest minds of an interstellar empire. And every night that strange feeling in his gut grew stronger. Something was wrong with it. Something obvious. Something that everyone had missed because they were too busy looking for complicated answers to notice the simple truth staring them in the face during the day. When he should have been sleeping, Marcus found himself watching the researchers work, standing in doorways with his mop and bucket while they ran their experiments and argued their theories. They were brilliant. These Varati scientists, with their iridescent shells and their multiple eyes that could see spectrums of light humans could not even imagine. And they used equipment so advanced it might as well have been magic. And they spoke in languages so complex that their simplest sentences took minutes to complete. But Marcus noticed something about them. Something that made him feel a strange mix of pity and frustration. They never looked at the weapon itself. Not really, They scanned it and measured it and analyzed every particle of its construction. But they did all of this through machines and sensors and holographic projections, treating the silence like a mathematical equation to be solved rather than a physical object to be examined. Marcus had fixed a lot of things in his life, and he knew that sometimes you had to get your hands dirty. Sometimes you had to touch the thing that was broken and feel it and look at it with your own eyes. Instead of trusting instruments to tell you what was wrong one afternoon, he approached a junior researcher, a young Varathi named Kethis, who seemed slightly less arrogant than the others. And Marcus asked him a simple question. Have you ever just looked at it up close? He said. Like really looked at it with your eyes, instead of your machinist. Kethis made a sound that Marcus had learned was Varathi laughter. A clicking noise that sounded like bones rattling in a box human, the researcher said. We have analyzed that device with instruments, that can detect a single atom vibrating on the other side of the galaxy. And you think our eyes would find something our machines missed maybe? Marcus said, but Kethis had already turned away. Dismissing him with a wave of one-clawed hand, Marcus tried again with a security guard named Torvax, a massive Varathi who stood outside the vault for 12 hours every day. You ever notice anything strange about that weapon? Marcus asked while mopping the floor near the guard station. Torvax looked down at Marcus, the way a mountain might look at a pebble. I am a guard. The Varathi said, I guard. I do not notice. Noticing is for scientists, and the scientists have been noticing for 300 years without success. So I think your human noticing would not help much. Marcus nodded and kept mopping. But he did not stop watching, and he did not stop thinking. And the feeling in his gut kept getting stronger. It happened on a Tuesday, or what passed for Tuesday on a space station, where the concept of days was more suggestion than reality. Marcus was cleaning the corridor outside the vault very late at night. Later than usual because there had been a minor emergency in the cafeteria involving spilled nutrient paste and a malfunctioning cleaning drone. And when he looked through the window at the silence, he finally saw what had been bothering him. There was a small panel on the side of the device, barely visible, almost hidden in the curves and angles of the alien construction. And it was not crooked by much, barely a millimeter out of alignment. But Marcus had spent his entire adult life noticing things that were crooked and loose and not quite right. And once he saw it, he could not unsee. I stood there for a long time, staring at that tiny imperfection, thinking about all the brilliant scientists who had studied this weapon for centuries without ever noticing that one small panel was slightly askew. Of course they had not noticed. He thought because they were looking for quantum anomalies and dimensional rifts and exotic energy signatures, not for something as simple and mundane as a crooked panel. Marcus knew he should report this to someone, should find a researcher and point out what he had seen and let the experts handle it. But he also knew what would happen if he did. They would dismiss him the way Kethis had dismissed him, the way everyone always dismissed him. And they would go back to their complicated theories and expensive equipment, and never bother to check something so simple and obvious. So Marcus did what any good handyman would do when faced with something that needed fixing. Fixed it. The security system was not designed to keep out janitors, because janitors needed access to clean, and Marcus had the clearance to enter the vault as long as he was alone and did not touch the research equipment. Nobody had ever thought to specify that he should not touch the artifact itself, because nobody had ever imagined that a janitor would want to. Marcus walked into the vault, his heart beating fast and his hands steady the way they always were when he was about to fix something. And he approached the silence for the first time up close. It was even more beautiful and strange than it had seemed through the window. All those curves and crystals seeming to shift and flow like water frozen in mid-motion, and Marcus felt a moment of doubt, wondering if he was about to make a terrible mistake. But the crooked panel was right there in front of him, obvious now, screaming wrongness to his handyman senses. And he reached for the multi-tool on his belt. The panel popped open easily, like it was meant to be opened. And inside, Marcus saw something that made him laugh out loud. In the silent vault, two crystalline rods, clearly meant to be connected, sitting a fraction of a millimeter apart. It looked exactly like a battery terminal that had come loose, exactly like a wire that had been disconnected, exactly like 100 simple problems Marcus had fixed in his life without even thinking about. I'd reached in with steady fingers and pushed the two rods together until they clicked into place. The silence hummed, light bloomed inside the crystal structure like a sunrise happening in fast forward. Colors. Marcus had no names for rippling through the device as ancient systems came online for the first time in millennia. Marcus stepped back, his heart pounding, as alarms began to blare throughout the station. He had fixed it after 300 years and 47 research teams, and 900 billion credits. A janitor from Ohio had fixed the most mysterious weapon in the galaxy by doing what janitors do. He had noticed something that needed fixing, and he had fixed it. The alarms grew louder, and Marcus could hear running footsteps in the corridor. And he knew his invisible life was about to become very complicated indeed. But standing there in the vault, watching the silence pulse with ancient power, Marcus Webb smiled. Some problems, he thought. Just needs someone willing to check if the battery is connected. The next 12 hours were the longest of Marcus Webb's life. Security forces surrounded the vault within minutes. Warriors in gleaming armor carrying weapons that hummed with barely contained energy. And they grabbed Marcus with hands that could have crushed stone and dragged him to an interrogation chamber deep in the station's core. They scanned him with devices that made his bones ache and his teeth buzz, looking for hidden technology or cybernetic implants or any explanation for how a simple human janitor could have accomplished what their empire's greatest scientists could not. They found nothing, because there was nothing to find, because Marcus was exactly what he appeared to be. A middle-aged man from Ohio with calloused hands and a talent for fixing broken things. Interrogators did not believe him when he explained what he had done. Did not believe that the solution had been so simple. Did not believe that 3 centuries of failure could be undone by noticing a crooked panel and pushing 2 rods together. They questioned him for hours. The same questions over and over, and Marcus answered the same way every time, telling the truth because he had nothing else to tell. And eventually, even the interrogators began to doubt their own disbelief. Then word came from the homeworld, and everything changed. Queen Siritha was coming. The queen had not left her palace in 40 years, had not traveled through a wormhole gate since the last Great War, had not visited any of her outer territories in so long that most of her subjects had never seen her in person. But she was coming now, traveling faster than any ship could fly, bending space itself to reach Station Omega 7, because she had to see for herself the human who had awakened the silence. Marcus was moved to a waiting chamber, a room with walls made of some material that shifted color like oil on water, and he was given plain clothes to replace his janitor uniform and food that he could not identify, but that tasted better than anything he had ever eaten. He was still wearing the standard issue jumpsuit of a station maintenance worker, just a clean one, because nobody had thought to provide anything else, and Marcus would not have known what to do with fancy clothes anyway. He waited, and the hours stretched like taffy. And he thought about Elena and wondered what she would say if she could see him now. She would laugh, he decided. That big, warm laugh that had made him fall in love with her 30 years ago in a parking lot outside a grocery store in Cleveland. She had always laughed at the absurdity of life, at the way the universe seemed to enjoy playing jokes on people who were just trying to get by. And she would have found this situation hilarious. A janitor summoned before an alien queen to explain how he fixed their magic weapon by jiggling a loose connection. The door opened and guards entered. Twice as many as before and twice as impressive. And behind them came more guards and then advisors in robes that cost more than Marcus would earn in a lifetime. And then finally, at the end of the procession, came Queen Siritha herself. Marcus had seen pictures of the queen in the station's information terminals, and heard stories about her from the Varathi workers he sometimes shared meals with. But nothing had prepared him for the reality of her presence. She was 7 feet tall, her body covered in an iridescent carapace that shimmered with colors that seemed to come from somewhere beyond the visible spectrum. And her eyes were ancient and vast and filled with an intelligence that made Marcus feel like an insect being examined by a god. But he did not look away, because looking away felt wrong somehow. And Queen Siritha met his gaze and held it for a long moment while her advisors murmured nervously behind her, "You are the human," she said, and her voice was music and thunder and the sound of stars being born. "Yes, ma'am," Marcus said, Because his mother had raised him to be polite, the Queen made a sound that might have been surprise. A soft clicking that rippled through her carapace like wind through leaves. My scientists tell me you activated a device that has resisted all attempts at analysis for over 300 years. She said, and they tell me you did this in less than 5 minutes. And they tell me you did this using nothing but a simple tool that any maintenance worker might carry. Marcus nodded. Because that was exactly what had happened. How? The Queen asked. And that single word carried the weight of centuries of frustration and billions of credits and the hopes of an entire empire. The connector was loose, Marcus said. The chamber went silent. Absolutely silent. A silence so complete that Marcus could hear his own heartbeat and the soft hum of the station's life support. And nothing else. The Queen's advisors looked at each other with expressions that Marcus could not read, but that seemed to contain shock and disbelief and something that might have been anger. Explain. The Queen said. Marcus shrugged, a gesture that seemed absurdly human in this room full of alien majesty. There was a panel on the side that did not sit flush with the rest of the casing, he said, and when I opened it, I found 2 rods that were supposed to be connected but were not quite touching. Looked like maybe the device got bumped at some point and the connection came loose. Happens all the time with delicate equipment. Shipping damage or just normal wear and tear. You were saying, the Queen said slowly, that the solution to the greatest technological mystery in my empire was a loose connection. Yes, ma'am, Marcus said. The Queen stared at him for a long moment, her ancient eyes unreadable. And Marcus wondered if he was about to be executed or rewarded, or simply laughed at and sent back to his mop and bucket. Then Queen Saritha did something that her advisors would talk about for years afterward. Something that became legend throughout the 12 systems of the Varathi Imperium. She laughed. It was a strange sound, clicking and musical and somehow warm, despite coming from a being who could order the destruction of worlds. And it filled the chamber and made the walls pulse with reflected color. 312 years, the Queen said between clicks of laughter. 47 research teams, 900 billion credits. And the answer was that someone needed to jiggle the wires. Marcus felt his lips twitch into a smile despite everything. Well, he said, I did not really jiggle them. More like push them together until they clicked. But yes, ma'am. That is pretty much what happened. The Queen's laughter faded slowly, like a sunset taking its time. And when she spoke again, her voice was thoughtful. Show me, she said. The procession back to the relic vault was unlike anything Marcus had experienced in his quiet life. He walked at the center of a formation of guards and advisors and scientists, with Queen Saritha herself gliding beside him like a shipmate of light and color. And every being on the station stopped to stare as they passed. Marcus kept his eyes forward and tried not to think about how strange this was. A janitor leading a queen through corridors he had mopped 1,000 times, passing supply closets where he stored his cleaning equipment and break rooms where he ate his lonely dinners. The vault was crowded now, filled with researchers who had been summoned from their sleep to witness this moment. And at the center of it all stood the silence, still glowing with the power Marcus had awakened. Queen's lead scientist was a Varathi named Dex, who had 17 advanced degrees and had published more papers than Marcus had read books in his entire life. And Dex looked at Marcus the way a professor might look at a student who had somehow solved an equation that the professor had spent decades failing to crack. Show us, Queen Saritha commanded, and Marcus walked to the device while dozens of alien eyes watched his every move. He knelt beside the silence and opened the panel he had opened before, revealing the 2 crystalline rods now firmly connected, pulsing with energy that made the air taste like lightning here. Marcus said, pointing at the connection, these 2 pieces were not touching before. There was a gap between them, maybe a fraction of a millimeter, barely visible to the naked eye. Dex leaned in close, his multiple eyes focusing on the connection with an intensity that seemed almost painful. We scanned this device at the subatomic level, the scientist said, his voice barely a whisper. We mapped every particle, every quantum state, every dimensional resonance. How did we not see this? Because you were not looking for it, Marcus said, and there was no judgment in his voice. Just simple truth. Your scans were designed to detect exotic energy patterns and quantum anomalies, and things I cannot even pretend to understand. But they were not designed to detect something as simple as a loose connection. You are saying our instruments were too sophisticated. Dex said. Marcus shook his head. I am saying your instruments were looking for the wrong kind of problem. He said, it is like using a telescope to find your car keys. The telescope might be the most advanced instrument in the world, but it is not going to help you find something sitting on your kitchen counter. The chamber was silent as the scientists processed this. As beings with intellects vast enough to comprehend the mathematics of reality itself, came to terms with the fact that they had been outsmarted by their own brilliance. One of the younger researchers, a Vorathi whose carapace had not yet darkened with age, spoke up with a voice that trembled slightly. How did you know to look for something so simple? He asked. Marcus stood up and dusted off his knees. A habit from years of kneeling on dirty floors. I did not know. He said, I just noticed that the panel was crooked. It was not sitting flush with the rest of the surface. And that bothered me the way it always bothers me when something is not quite right. So I opened it up to see what was wrong. Fex made a sound that Marcus had never heard a Vorathi make before. A low keening that seemed to contain grief and wonder and something that might have been shame. We never looked at it. The scientist said, not with our eyes, not directly. We trusted our instruments because our instruments are precise and our eyes are limited. And our instruments told us the structural integrity was perfect. Your instruments were right. Marcus said, the structural integrity was perfect. Everything was exactly where it was supposed to be, except for one tiny piece that had shifted just enough to break the connection. Your instruments could not detect that because there was nothing to detect. No damage, no decay. Just two things that were supposed to be touching and were not. Queen Siratha had been silent through all of this, watching and listening with those ancient eyes that had seen civilizations rise and fall. And when she finally spoke, her voice was soft and thoughtful. My people have a saying. She said, that wisdom is knowing what you do not know. But I think today we have learned a different lesson. That wisdom is also knowing when you are looking in the wrong direction. She turned to face her scientists, her advisors, her guards, all the brilliant and powerful beings who had served her for centuries. Let this be remembered. The Queen said, let it be taught in our schools and spoken of in our councils, that the greatest mystery of our age was solved not by our finest minds, but by a human janitor, who noticed that a panel was crooked. Marcus felt his face grow warm, embarrassed by the attention in a way he had never been embarrassed before. It was not really that impressive. He said, anyone could have done it if they had just looked, but no one did look. The Queen said, except you, and that is what makes it impressive. Not the solution itself, but the fact that you found it when everyone else had given up. She turned back to Marcus, and there was something in her eyes that he had not seen before, something that looked almost like respect. Tell me, Marcus Webb of Ohio, what do you want as a reward for this service to my empire? Marcus thought about this for a moment, thought about all the things he could ask for, wealth beyond imagination and titles and power. And then he thought about what he actually wanted. What would actually make him happy? I would like to pay off my debt, he said, and maybe get a better mop. The ones on this station leave streaks. The Queen stared at him for a long moment, and then she laughed again. That clicking musical sound that seemed to light up the room. I offer you the gratitude of an empire, she said. And you ask for debt relief and cleaning supplies. Marcus shrugged. I am a simple man. He said, yes, Queen Saratha said, her voice warm with something that sounded like affection. Yes, you are, and perhaps that is exactly what this galaxy needs more of. The silence, now that it was awake, proved to be everything the ancient texts had promised and more when activated. It generated a field that spread across thousands of kilometers. And within that field, every weapon simply stopped working. Energy weapons faded to nothing, and projectile weapons jammed, and even the chemical reactions that powered explosives refused to complete it, did not destroy anything, did not hurt anyone, just made violence impossible within its range. Queen Saratha deployed it for the first time 3 months after Marcus fixed it, using it to end a conflict that had been raging for decades between two of her vassal worlds. And when the soldiers on both sides found their weapons useless, they simply stopped fighting and started talking. The war ended in 2 days. News of the silence spread across the galaxy, and with it came the story of how it had been awakened. The story of a human janitor who had succeeded where centuries of research had failed. Marcus became famous in a way he had never wanted and did not enjoy. Reporters from 100 worlds wanted to interview him. Scientists wanted to study him. Politicians wanted to be seen with him. And through it all, Marcus just wanted to be left alone to do his job. But Queen Saratha had other plans. She created a new position for him, officially titled Practical Solutions Consultant, which meant that before any problem in the Empire was declared unsolvable, it had to pass through Marcus Webb's hands first. Was given a workshop next to the Relic Vault, a small room filled with tools from a dozen different worlds, and people began bringing him their impossible problems the way ancient pilgrims might have brought offerings to an oracle. A quantum computer that had stopped responding to commands turned out to have a cooling fan clogged with dust. A faster than light communication system that had been producing garbled signals turned out to have a cable plugged into the wrong port. An ancient defensive satellite that had been drifting dead in orbit for centuries turned out to have a switch that someone had accidentally bumped into the off position thousands of years ago. Not every problem had a simple solution. Marcus was the first to admit that, and sometimes the brilliant scientists really did need to do their complicated math and build their sophisticated instruments, but more often than not, the answer was something obvious, something that everyone had overlooked because they were too busy being clever. The Varathi began to study humans with new interest. Not their warriors or their leaders, but their maintenance workers and their mechanics and their plumbers. The people who kept civilization running while everyone else took them for granted. They discovered a species that had evolved not through physical strength or psychic ability, but through something much stranger, an endless, restless drive to fix things, to make broken things work again, to look at problems and refuse to accept that they could not be solved. Human children took apart their toys to see how they worked. Human adults spent their weekends repairing cars and houses and appliances. Human history was full of people who had looked at impossible challenges and said, surely it cannot be that hard. Queen Saratha visited Marcus in his workshop sometimes, arriving without ceremony or guards, just an ancient queen and a middle-aged janitor sharing a cup of tea and talking about broken things. Your species is strange, she told him one afternoon, watching him repair a Varthi entertainment device that had been declared beyond saving. You lack our long lives and our physical strength and our advanced senses. You have no natural weapons and no psychic abilities. By all logic, you should have been eaten by predators millions of years before you ever developed technology. Marcus looked up from his work and smiled. We are stubborn, he said, and too dumb to know when something is impossible. No. The queen said, that is not quite it. I have watched your kind for centuries now, and I think I understand. You see broken things and you cannot help but try to fix them. It is not a choice you make. It is simply what you are. A species of fixers, of solvers, of beings who refuse to let problems remain problems. Marcus thought about this for a moment. Thought about his grandfather teaching him to repair radios. Thought about his father showing him how to fix a car engine. Thought about all the hours he had spent with his hands deep in broken machines. Coaxing them back to life, I suppose that is true, he said. We do like to fix things. The Queen clicked her laughter, like is not the right word. She said, you need to fix things. It is in your blood. And that is why a janitor from Ohio could solve a puzzle that defeated my empire's greatest minds. Not because you are smarter than them, but because they were looking for complicated answers, and you were just looking for something broken to fix. Marcus went back to his repair work, his hands moving with the ease of long practice. I still think anyone could have done it. He said, perhaps, the Queen said, but you were the one who did. And that is what history will remember. The story of Marcus Webb spread across the galaxy and became something like a legend. A tale told on 1,000 worlds about the human who fixed the unfixable became a proverb among the Vorathi. A reminder against arrogance that parents told their children and teachers told their students, before you declare it impossible. They would say, ask the human with the mop. Marcus lived for many more years after that, continuing his work in his small workshop next to the relic vault, fixing the problems that nobody else could solve. And when he finally died, old and content and surrounded by friends from a dozen different species, he was given a funeral fit for a king. Queen Saratha herself attended, standing at the back of the crowd, watching as they laid to rest the simple man who had changed their empires, placed a single object on his grave, a small metal tool that could fit in a pocket. The multi-tool he had used to open the panel on the silence all those years ago. Here lies Marcus Webb. The inscription on his memorial read, he fixed things. It was, everyone agreed, exactly what he would have wanted, and somewhere in the vault behind the memorial, the silence hummed softly, still working after all these millennia, still keeping the peace, still proof that sometimes the biggest problems have the smallest solutions. All you need is someone willing to look for them.